Hey friends, what's up? Good to see you. What's going on, friends? How you doing? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chav Zayin, Daf 27 of Masechta Behor. Friends, today's Daf begins with sort of a conclusion of the question that we started at the end of yesterday's Daf, which is there a concept of something being muksa for just part of Shabbos, or once it becomes muktzah for part of Shabbos, does it become muktzah for the entire Shabbos? We sort of wrap up that question, and then we get into the question of can you check out a behor for mooms on Yom Tov? So we get into that. We get to a new Mishnah. If you have a animal that kicks the can on Yom Tov, it dies. So are you allowed to move it, or is it muktzah? That's obviously an interesting question. And then we get, at the very end, we have another Mishnah which discusses how exactly you can sort of go to the butcher on Yom Tov to slaughter an animal for you and your friends. So, of course, that's also very interesting. Friends, we're going to start on Daf Chav Vav Amud Beis, all the way at the bottom, last line on the page. Amar Reb Zera. Says Reb Zera. Tashma, come in here. Mipulin va'adoshim. Come in here from beans and lentils. Pulin va'adoshim meikara chazu lachus. That when it comes to beans, when it comes to lentils, so initially you can eat them raw if you want to. I guess you can eat them raw. Okay. Shadinu b'kedera idchulu. And now you put them into a pot. And now while they're boiling hot in a pot, you can't eat them. They're boiling hot. So they're basically muktzah, as long as they're being boiled. Gomer bishulayu. And when you finish cooking them, chazulu, they are now fit once again. So Reb Zera is saying, look, on Yom Tov, we're allowed to cook beans and lentils. And yet, if we think about it, beans and lentils, you can eat them raw. So they're fit. Initially, you can eat them as they are. They then become muktzah for a while you're boiling them, and they're boiling hot, and you can't currently access them in their current state. Once they're then finished, and they're finished cooking, and I guess you let them cool down or whatever it is, and now you can eat them. So they go through this stage where they're basically unusable, muktzah, and yet they then become edible at the end. So therefore, Reb Zera wants to argue from the fact that you're allowed to cook and eat beans and lentils on Yom Tov, Memele means that ein muktzah l'chatzi Shabbos. That if something becomes muktzah at one point during Shabbos or during Yom Tov, it doesn't become muktzah for the entire Yom Tov, because we see that at a certain point these beans and lentils are sort of unusable while they're boiling and cooking, but they then become edible and mutter to eat afterwards. So we see ein muktzah l'chatzi Shabbos. Omar le Abaye. Abaye responds to Reb Zera. Now, I was beginning to come up with a theory. I was starting to think that there are two Reb Zeras. I think maybe I was thinking about that in Masechta Yoma, maybe. Then that this would make sense that Abaye, that there was a Reb Zera sort of around the time of Rava and Abaye. So Abaye is now responding to this Reb Zera, as opposed to the Reb Zera who was a contemporary of Rabba and Rav Yosef. I don't know if you would respond. I don't know if Abaye would necessarily respond to that Reb Zera in this way, especially since that Reb Zera was a contemporary of Abaye, of Rabba and Rav Yosef. He moved to Eretz Yisrael, and Abaye was in Bavel. And so anyways, Abaye must have been younger. I don't know if the young Abaye would respond to that Reb Zera, because I think that there may have been another Reb Zera, and that's what Abaye is responding to. So Abaye says to Reb Zera, well, the time according to you, tikshilach kederis de alma. So Abaye asks a gevaldige kasha against Reb Zera. He says, wait a second, Reb Zera, think about every single Friday afternoon. What happens on Friday afternoon? That what do? You want to serve chicken. You want to serve chicken soup on a Friday night. So you take the pot full of chicken soup and you boil it until Shabbos starts. You take it off the stove at the last minute, And then, so that way it'll be hot for your Shabbos Suda. So what do we see? That Ben Hashmoshes, that when Shabbos starts, it's essentially mukse. It's not usable. It's too hot right now. And yet, at night, at our Shabbos Suda, we eat the chicken soup. So what do we see? So we see that clearly something is off over here. Meaning, we can't claim that while something is too hot, it becomes muktzah, and don't bring rayas from there that ein muktzah l'chatzi Shabbos. Because if that's the case, then how do you understand, because every single, whenever you have anything that's hot, when Shabbos comes in, and when Shabbos comes in, it's too hot, and according to your logic, Zera, that would be considered muktzah, which means that ben arbayim, that ben hashmashos, when Shabbos comes in, it's muktzah, and yet we still eat it that night. So rather, elagamru bidei adam lo kami bayalan. No, when it's talking about something that's in our hands, such as cooking food, if I wanted to, I could have just taken it off with the flame a little bit earlier if I wanted to, and it would have been done. What we're talking about is something that's out of our hands. For example, making raisins. Making raisins, it's ready whenever it's ready. You let it dry for a while in the sun until it's ready. There's not really much that we can do, as opposed to like making soup. You could take it off the flame whenever you want, and it's done. So Abai says, look, what we're interested in knowing about over here is, is there muktzah l'chatzi Shabbos on something that is sort of not in our hands to determine. So we just got to wait until it's ready, and we don't have an answer. We don't seem to have an answer for that. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya havale hau buchra. Oh, so Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, who is Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya? If I'm not mistaken, he was the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi. So Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya havale hau buchra, he had a behor. Now, what's interesting about this is, of course, Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi's family comes from the Shevet of Yehuda, if I'm not mistaken, from the Shevet of Yehuda. So he was not a Kohen. He was not a Kohen. And we're saying Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya Avalehu Buchor, he had a certain Bechor, and as Rashi points out, what was he doing with the Bechor if he wasn't a Kohen? Well, at his house, there would always be Kohanim around it, and they would eat Bechoros. So he had Bechoros around for the Kohanim who would hang out at his house. Fine. So Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya Avalehu Buchor, he had a certain Bechor. Shadri l'kamed Rabbi Ami, and on Yom Tif, he sent it in front of Rabbi Ami, so Rabbi Ami could have a look and see if it has a moom or not. A moom kavua, and can they slaughter it and enjoy it. Sover d'lo l'mechazi. Now, Rabbi Ami was saying, look, I'm not going to look, I'm not going to check out, I'm not rowing moomin on Yom Tif. I'm not going to check out to look and see if this Bechor has a moom on Yom Tif, which is like Reb Shimon's opinion in our Mishnah. Where was this Mishnah anyways? Okay, in yesterday's daf. Fine. Omele Reb Zrika v'teim Reb Yirmiyah. Now says Reb Zrika, some takasei Reb Yirmiyah, he says to Reb Ami, Reb Yehuda Reb Shimon halacha Reb Yehuda. That, friends, we learned in Masechta Eruvin that when you have machlokas between Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon, the halacha is like Reb Yehuda. So if that's the case, Reb Yehuda in our Mishnah at the top of Chavav Mud Aleph that we saw yesterday, Reb Yehuda says, yes, we are rowing Moomin on Yom Tif, that we do check out Moomin on Yom Tif. Reb Shimon says we're not, but Lemaise, when we have machlokas between Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon, we're passing like Reb Yehuda. So therefore, we should be checking out animals to see if they're Moomin, if they have a Moom on Yom Tif. So how come Reb Ami is not looking at this animal to see if it's a Baal Moom? So Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya then sent the animal in front of Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, and he also said, look, I'm not going to look at this animal on Yom Tiv. Omerle Rabbi Yirmiyah v'tem Rabbi Zrika. Says Rabbi Yirmiyah, some say it was Rabbi Zrika, so he says to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Reb Yehuda, Reb Shimon, halacha Reb Yehuda, the same thing. I don't understand. When you have machlokas between Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon, we paskin like Reb Yehuda. Reb Yehuda says that we look at moomin, that we inspect moomin on Yom Tiv. So Beitzah Nafcha, how come you don't want to look at this animal to see if it's about moom? Omer Reb Abba, Givaldik. So Reb Abba then says to Reb Zrika, my time with lo shavaktinu l'rabon l'mebed uvdik Reb Shimon. So Reb Abba says, no, Reb Zrika, what are you getting so worked up about? What's in it for you? Like, I don't know. Why are you getting so excited to support Rabbi Yehuda, to back up Rabbi Yehuda, not like Reb Shimon? Okay, so Beitzah Nafcha, Reb Ami, they wanted to pass like Reb Shimon. Okay, we know there's the Gemara Memvav of Masechta Eruvin that says that Rabbi Yehuda, Reb Shimon, halacha Reb Yehuda. But okay, so he's passing like Reb Shimon. What do you want me to tell you? Leave him alone. So Amar Rabbi, my time at Loshav Tinu Rabban Lemev Ruvda Reb Shimon Omerle. So Zrika responds, Vat ma biyodoch. No, Rabbi, what do you know that I don't? Omerle. So Rabbi says, listen. Hochyam Reb Zera. This is what Reb Zera said, and this is the altar Reb Zera. The Reb Zera is the contemporary of Rabbi and Reb Yosef. Halacha Reb Shimon. That the halacha is like Reb Shimon. So Rabbi says, look. Reb Zera says that the halacha is like Reb Shimon, and that is why we're passing like Reb Shimon. Because yes, even though we do have a principle of Reb Yehuda, Reb Shimon, halacha Reb Yehuda, for some reason Reb Zera felt that the halacha is like Reb Shimon. That's why they're passing like Reb Shimon. Now, Omar Mandu, a certain fellow said, Azki ve'esek la'asum v'agmel l'shmaitim u'pumei demara, that maybe one day I will merit and I will be able to go to Eretz Yisrael and hear this from Reb Zera himself. Now, what's very interesting is I assume that this whole dialogue was happening in Eretz Yisrael already. Yehuda Nesiya, wasn't he in Eretz Yisrael? I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Reb Abba, we learned about Masechta Brachos that he made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. Reb Ami was in Eretz Yisrael. I don't know, where was Reb Yitzchak Nafka, but they all have Rebbe, they're not Rav, they're Rebbe. So wasn't this already in Eretz Yisrael? So I don't know, maybe he was saying that he would go maybe to where Reb Zera was. I don't know, Pashta says this fellow was saying maybe I will merit to go to Eretz Yisrael, but weren't they already in Eretz Yisrael? Anyways, so says this fellow, may I merit to go to Eretz Yisrael and hear this halacha from Reb Zera himself, Kisolik Lawsum, when he went to Eretz Yisrael, Ashkechel Reb Zera, he found Reb Zera, Omarle. And he said to Reb Zera, so this fellow said to Reb Zera, Omar Mar halacha Reb Shimon. So did you say that the halacha is taka like Reb Shimon, that we do not inspect moomin on Yom Tif Omarle? And Reb Zera says, Lo anam mistavra. Look, it's not me. I didn't say that the halacha is like Reb Shimon. Rather, I'm midiktani b'masnisin Reb Shimon Omer kol shein mumo nikam ibod yomein zemuna muchan. Reb Zera says, look, my logic was the following. It says in the Mishnah that according to Reb Shimon, we don't look at moomin on Yom Tif. And then we had this other brisa where it said that according to the Chachamim, we don't look at moomin whether it was a moom that was already there from before Yom Tif, or whether it was a moom that got there on Yom Tif. We don't look at moomin on Yom Tif, which memei, and that was quoted as the Chachamim, as we saw in Daf Chaf Bav Amud Beis. So memele, that means, if we're saying we're treating Reb Shimon's opinion as the Chachamim's opinion, so memele means that the halacha is like Reb Shimon. So that's why I said that the halacha is like Reb Shimon. Very, 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 very interesting stuff over there. Very, very interesting stuff over there. Very, 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 very interesting stuff over there. Because it also makes you think, this is already, I'm digressing, but there's always the shaila of what exactly is the chachamim? Because I'm already digressing, but we say halacha k'sta mishnah, that the halacha is like an anonymous mishnah, and we've seen Rashi explain this to mean that whenever whenever Rebbe wanted you to know that the halacha was like a certain Tana, so he would just say it anonymously. Because, right, if you would say, for example, Reb Shimon says that the halacha is that you don't check out moomin on Yom Tiv, So then it says, well, if Reb Shimon says that, well, then what does everybody else say? The halacha must be like everybody else. But if you just say it sort of anonymously, so then nobody asks any questions. This is just the halacha. But we refer to it, what's the anonymous people in the Mishnah? Often we refer to it as the Rabbanon, the Chachamim. But the Chachamim is really just a particular opinion, such as we just said, that when we said Chachamim in the Beitzah from yesterday, it was really a reference to Reb Shimon. It was like, it's Ki'ilu, says Reb Zera, like what Reb Zera is basically saying, he's saying, look, Reb Shimon said that the halacha is that we don't look at moom and Yom Tov, but that's just Reb Shimon. And then you say that, well, but Reb Yehuda argues, and Reb Yehuda, Reb Shimon, halacha Reb Yehuda, right? So it must be like Reb Yehuda. But we have a brisa though that kind of refers to the Chacham, Reb Shimon's opinion as being the Chachamim's opinion, in order to davka say that the halacha is like Reb Shimon. Because if we're saying it as the Chachamim, so Memele, well, if it's the Chachamim, then that must be the halacha. And we're saying that it's Reb Shimon's opinion. So we're referring to the Reb Shimon as the Chachamim in this case. So anyways, you see it from time to time. Who is the Chachamim? This Tana. How could Chachamim, which is plural, be a particular Tana? But could be, the point is that sometimes when we want to say that the halacha is like a particular Tana, we'll refer to it as the Chachamim, as the opinion of the Chachamim, or as sort of an anonymous opinion. Anyways, I'm digressing. I might not be right, but it is very interesting. To think about sort of, right, when you have that Stam Mishnah to sort of give bulk to a certain opinion. Over here we see the opinion of Reb Shimon being the opinion of the Chachamim. And that's why Reb Zera says, you see, that's how we know that even though in general we would pass him like Reb Yehuda, we're going to pass him like Reb Shimon because it's the Chachamim opinion. Anyways, what do you want me to tell you? Just the musings of a nudnik. So how do we paskin? Do we look at Mumin and Yom Tiv or don't we? Rav Yosef says of Yosef Toshma. Says of Yosef, listen up. The Tayyab Ashle Ravrave, that it's like hanging on very thick ropes. Dam Reb Shimon ben Pazi, Am Reb Shua ben Levi, Am Reb Yosef ben Shaul, Am Rebbe Mishum Kol Kadisha b'Yerushalayim. So Reb Shimon ben Pazi says the name of Reb Shua ben Levi, says the name of Reb Yosef ben Shaul, says the name of Rebbe, who says the name of the Kol Kadisha of Jerusalem. Reb Shimon v'Chaverov Amru, that Reb Shimon, which Reb Shimon? Reb Shimon ben Manasseh, v'Chaverov, and his Chaverov, right? If we look at Reb Shimon ben Manasseh's opinion from yesterday, it says Harei Amru, they said. So the Kala Kadisha of Yerushalayim, they're saying that Reb Shimon ben Manasseh and they said, who he's talking about. So Reb Shimon v'Chaverov Amru, they said halacha Reb Meir, that the halacha is like Reb Meir. So the Kala Kadisha b'Yerushalayim is saying that Reb Shimon ben Manasseh says that the halacha is like Reb Meir. Okay, now 1 second. Rav Yosef says, I don't understand. Amru, they said, right? The Kala Kadisha, this is a technical point, that the Kala Kadisha b'Yerushalayim was quoting Reb Shimon ben Manasseh. But the Kala Kadisha b'Yerushalayim was much older than Reb Shimon ben Manasseh. Rashi says that Reb Shimon ben Manasseh was in Rebbe's generation. Now we see in this whole, right, who is it? Reb Shimon ben Pazi, Reb Shua ben Levi, Reb Yosef ben Shaul, says Reb Yehuda Anasi quoting the Kala Kadisha b'Yerushalayim. So the Kala Kadisha b'Yerushalayim was older than Rebbe. How could they be quoting Reb Shimon ben Manasseh, who was a contemporary of Rebbe? Ele b'shittis Reb Meir Amrua. Okay, rather what it means is that the Kala Kadisha of Jerusalem, they were sort of not saying in the name of Reb Shimon ben Manasseh, but they were sort of quoting a younger Torah scholar, Reb Shimon ben Manasseh, as quoting Reb Meir's opinion. Okay, very technical. Okay, here we go. The Tanan, as we learn in the Mishnah, Hashoichet is a behor. A fellow slaughters a behor without showing it to an expert to see if it has a moom or not. Right? So in general, we would first show it to the expert, confirm that it has a moom kavua, a permanent moom, and only then slaughter it. But this fellow slaughtered the behor before showing it to the expert. And then afterwards, he showed the blemish to the expert. Okay? So he kind of did things out of order. Rabbi Yehuda matir. Rabbi Yehuda says, okay, beseder, we did it out of order. You probably should have first sent it to the expert to have a look and only then slaughter it. But he didn't do that. He first slaughtered it and then he sent it to the expert. Not that big of a deal. Reb Meir Omer, whereas Reb Meir says, since he slaughtered it without first consulting the expert, also you are not allowed to eat this behor. You did things out of order. Al Muksav Reb Meir. So what does Reb Meir hold? Re'iyas behor lab k're'iyas treifa. That the checking out, the inspection of a behor is not like the inspection of a treifa. It's more stringent than the inspection of a treifa. If you have to check an animal to see if it's a treifa, to see if it has some kind of disease that it would not live for 12 months, and therefore you're not allowed to eat it because it's treif. So the checking of a behor to check for a moom is more stringent than the checking for treifas. Re'iyas behor mechayim, that you have to check out, you have to inspect the behor before slaughtering it. Re'iyas treifa la'achar shchita, whereas you inspect the treifa after, you slaughter it and only afterwards you check out for treifas. Umino, and then what do we see from there? The re'iyas treifa afilu b'yomtiv, that now an additional, we can then extrapolate that an additional stringency would be that while you would be able to inspect a treifa on Yom Tiv, Riyaz B'chor Me'erev Yom Tiv, you would have to inspect a B'chor from Erev Yom Tiv, not on Yom Tiv. So we see that Reb Meir's opinion that if you first slaughter the behor and only afterwards check it to have it checked by an expert, so you're not allowed to eat it, that means that we're stringent by behor, and because we're stringent by behor, so memela, then you would have to have it checked out for moom before Yom Tiv, not on Yom Tiv. So we see that Reb Meir and Reb Shimon both agree that you would not check out an animal for moomin, a behor for moomin on Yom Tiv. Abaye says to Yosef, moomin plige. 1 second. Do you really think that the machlokas between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda regarding if you first slaughter the animal, the behor, and only then have it checked out for moomin, that Reb Meir says it's mutter, Reb Yehuda says it's also, no, the opposite. Reb Yehuda says it's mutter, Reb Meir says it's also. Do you think that is about, can you check out moomin or not? Biknoso pligi, it's a matter of do you find the fellow or not. It's a find. That says Rab Bar Bachana, the name of Rabbi Yochanan bedokin sheba'ayin kuli amalo plige de oser mishum de mishtanen. That when it comes to cataracts in the eye of the behor, everyone agrees, both Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda would agree that would be also, that you wouldn't be able to get it checked out after the fact because it changes between when it's alive and when it's dead. Ki plige, where they argue, is b'mumin shebaguf, with mooms in the body, for like a broken leg or something like that. Something that is pretty clear already that it's a moom kavua. Reb Meir saver gazrinan mumin shebaguf atu mumin sheba'ayin. The Reb Meir says, look, just like you're not able to check out a cataract after it's dead, you also can't check out these other mooms after it's dead. Reb Yehuda saver lo gazrinan, whereas Reb Yehuda says that we don't make gezeres, and it's fine. Even after the animal's dead, you could still check it out, right? So therefore, Reb Meir is really just, he's not saying, technically speaking, are you able to check out the moom of behor after it died? Technically speaking, yes, you can. But we penalize you, we fine you for not, for jumping the gun, for not having it checked out in advance. And we say that because you didn't check it out in advance, you are not allowed, we treat it as if it was like a cataract, and you're not allowed to check it out after the fact. Amr of Nachman bar Yitzchok, Masnitzin Namideka. We can also infer it from that Mishnah, the Ketani, as we taught. Reb Meir Omer Ho'il v'nishchat shelo al pi mumche. Also, that what does Reb Meir say? Reb Meir says, look, the reason why you're not allowed to eat this animal, this behor that was first slaughtered and then checked for moomin, was how come? Ho'il Because you went out of order, because you took things into your own hands and slaughtered the animal before getting it checked out by an expert, therefore we're fining you essentially, and that's why. Because you went out of order, that is why you're not allowed to get it checked out after the fact. Not because al pi halacha you're not allowed to, but because you were a nudnik. That's why you're not allowed to. So what do we see? We see memela that it is a fine, and that's the whole thing. But it's not about, can you check out moomin and things like that we can kind of say that Reb Meir and Reb Shimon agree that ein ron moomin b'yom tif. No, that's not the point. It's about, do you make a knas or not? Says the Gemara, Ami vardinoa chozi buchur devenesia havo. That Ami vardinoa, okay, he was the fellow who would check out the behors for the house of the nafsi. Biyomatav lo avachozi, and he would not check out the behors for mums on Yom Tif. Asuva amrule the Reb Ami. So they said to Reb Ami, hey, what's the deal? Why is Ami Vardinoa passing like Reb Shimon and not checking out behors for mums on Yom Tif? Amrulu Reb Ami said to them, Shapir Ka'avid to Lochazi, that he's taka doing the right thing by not checking out these behors on Yom Tif. In fact, the Gemara, Ini, is that really true that Reb Ami said that Ami Vardinoa was doing the right thing by refraining from checking out the behors on Yom Tif? Reb Ami Gufe Chazi, but Reb Ami himself would check out behors on Yom Tif, which is interesting because earlier on in the Daf Taka we said that Reb Ami didn't. Reb Ami ki chazi me'esmol have a chazi. So the Gemara says, look, Lemaisa, Reb Ami would actually check from Erev Yom Tif, he would check out the behors. If Yom Tif shayule kamashayel, on Yom Tif he would only ask follow-up questions, because in Erev Yom Tif, obviously Reb Ami was very busy with all sorts of things. People would come with their behors to check if it's a moom, and he would say, yes, it's a moom, but come back tomorrow, I have more questions that I need to ask you. Heichi ava ovda, to find out some more details. Like a certain fellow, a certain Kohen who came to Rava on Erev Yom Tif. And when this fellow showed up, Rava was scrubbing his head. He was getting ready for Yom Tif. Rava looked up and saw the mum on the behor of this Kohen who came by. He says, okay, I see there's a mum. Come back tomorrow. When this Kohen came back the next day, Amalei says, tell me what happened. How did the animal get this mum? Amalei. So this Kohen responds, well, there was a fence made out of thorns, and we had barley out on one side of the fence, and the animal, the behor, was on the other side of the thorn fence, and there was, barley on one side, animal on the other, thorns in the middle. By the barley mechal, and when the animal went to chaparain from the barley that was on the other side of the fence, of the thorn fence, the animal picked up its head and got a split in its lip because of the thorns. The thorns split its lip, which would be considered a mum kavua. Omar le Dilma ad goram play, to which Rava says, wait, but 1 second, how do I know that you didn't cause this? Maybe you're responsible for this mum. Because after all, as Rashi points out, the Kohanim were suspect that maybe they would make mums in these animals because there was a pain in the neck. There would be a firstborn animal, you give it to the Kohen. Nowadays there's no Beis HaMikdash, the Kohen's got nothing to do with it, it's Kodshim. He can't eat it himself. He's just got to wait for it to get a mum. All along, he's feeding it, and it's a headache for him. So the Kohanim are suspect that maybe they do things in order for the animals to generate mums so that they could slaughter them and eat them. So therefore, Rava, basically what was happening is, Reb Ami, Rava, what they would say is on Erev Yom Tif, they would look and ascertain, sure, it's a mum, but they would nonetheless say, I want you to come back on Yom Tif, I have more follow-up questions for you. As we see with Rava, he says, tell me what happened. The guy says, look, there was barley on one side of a thorn fence, and the animal was on the other side of a thorn fence. The animal went to get the barley and got a mum. To which Rava says, so maybe you did this on purpose, in order for it to get a mum? Amalei lo. And this fellow says, no, I didn't set it up, it just happened that way. Now the Gemara says, wait, but who says that grama Who says that causing something to happen is actually a problem when it comes to moomin? Right? And let's say the Kohen did set it up. Let's say the Kohen put out some barley on this side of the fence. The animal was on the other side of the fence. And, one thing led to the next and the animal got a moom. So is that, even if the guy sets it up intentionally, is that the guy's fault? It's what's called a grama. He didn't directly cause a moom in the animal. He put some barley out and one thing led to the next. And in the end, the animal got a moom, but he didn't do it directly. Who says that that's a problem? The Tanya. So the Gemara answers, well, because we learn in the Beitzah, moom lo yiyeh, that there shouldn't be a moom in it. Ainli ela shelo yiyeh bo moom. All I know is that I shouldn't cause it directly to get a moom. Minayin shelo yigrom lo, I did over acher. How do I know that I shouldn't even cause for it to get a moom? Shelo yavi botzek o dvele v'yaneach lo al gabei ha'ozen. How do I know that I shouldn't just take some dough or some good geschmack figs and put it on the behor's ears, so that a dog should come and bite off the animal's ear? Very creative. Tamloma kol mum, omar mum v'amar kol mum. Well, because the pasuk doesn't just say mum lo yebo, it says kol mum lo yebo. It says that there shouldn't be any mum. And kol comes to include that you also shouldn't cause the animal to get a mum. You shouldn't just cover its ear in geschmacka stuff so that a dog will come and bite off its ear. That would not be very nice, and it also would be a grama, something, so it would be causing it to become a mum, to get a mum, and that's not okay. Says the next Mishnah, behema shemesa, if you have an animal that dies on Yom Tov lo yizizena mimekoma, don't move it, it's muktzah. And there was a story with Reb Tarfon, that they asked Reb Tarfon about this question, about an animal that dies on Yom Tov, can you move it? And what about when you have chala that becomes tameh? I guess, can you move that either? Right, because there's nothing to do with chala that becomes tameh. You can't burn it, you can't, on Yom Tov, you can't do anything with it. So v'nichnas the Beis HaMedrash, Reb Tarfon went to the Beis HaMedrash, v'shal, and he asked, v'armulu, and they said to him, lo yazizam mimkomam, do not move the animal, do not move the chala tmeya from their place. Okay, sounds like fun. It says the Gemara, lema tnan stama de lo Reb Shimon. So let's say that if the Mishnah is saying that if an animal dies, it's essentially muktzah, you can't move it. So it sounds like it's not like Reb Shimon. The Tanya is learning about Reb Shimon Omer. Says Reb Shimon, you can cut up gourds before an animal, and you can cut up animal carcass in front of dogs. So what do we see? We see that Reb Shimon says you're allowed to cut up an animal carcass. So memele, it's not muktzah. And our Mishnah is saying you're not allowed to move this animal, which means that it is muktzah. Reb Yehuda Omer says Reb Yehuda em lo haisen nevele me'erev Shabbos asura. That if this, if the animal was already dead before Shabbos, so then Reb Yehuda says, look, it's not muktzah. The animal was already dead when Shabbos started. You can feed it to the dogs, fine. But Reb Shimon says that if the animal dies, but Reb Yehuda says if the animal dies on Shabbos, you cannot feed the nevela to the dogs. Reb Shimon says that you can. Our Mishnah says that if an animal dies, you're not allowed to move it. So Memele, Reb Shimon would disagree with that, which means that our Mishnah is not like Reb Shimon, afilu tamer Reb Shimon. You can even say that our Mishnah is Reb Shimon. So why does the Mishnah say you're not allowed to move the nevela? I thought Reb Shimon says that nevela is usable, you can feed it to dogs. Well, when Reb Shimon says that you're allowed to feed an animal to the dogs, that's an animal that was about to die anyways when Shabbos started, so you kind of were expecting it to die. But an animal that was completely healthy when Shabbos started, you had no expectation that it would die. And therefore, even Reb Shimon would say that it's muktzah, and therefore, when our Mishnah says that you're not allowed to move a dead animal on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, that could even be Reb Shimon, because it's talking about an animal that was completely healthy when Shabbos began, and you had no intention that it was going to die. So this makes sense, according to my Bar Meimar in the name of Rava the Amar, who said, Reb Shimon Shapir. So it says, my Bar Meimar in the name of Rava, that Reb Shimon would admit that when you have an animal that's completely healthy when Shabbos begins, and then it dies on Shabbos, it's going to be asur. So we could say that this Mishnah is talking about when it was completely healthy when Shabbos started, and that's why you're not allowed to move it. Or when Yom Tov started. Elamai brei de Rav Yosef, mishmei de Rava de Omar. But according to my brei de Rav Yosef, in the name of Rava, who said, Chalukai Reb Shimon afilu b'ba'alei chayim shemesu. That Reb Shimon would even disagree when it came to animals that were fully healthy when Shabbos began. Shemutarim, that you'd be allowed to feed them to, that they're not muksa, you could do whatever you want with them. Even when they're completely healthy. Well, if that's the case, so then how come our Mishnah, so if our Mishnah is saying that you're not allowed to move this animal that died on Yom Tov, so Memele can't be Reb Shimon, because Reb Shimon, according to my brei de Rav Yosef Ishmei de Rava, according to Reb Shimon, any animal that dies on Shabbos or on Yom Tov is mutter. So then why would the Mishnah say you're not allowed to move it? My ikalamema, what are you going to say? So Tirgum is the ear bebemas kodshim. So Ziri says, well, you could say that our Mishnah over here is talking about animals of kodshim that died. That if you have an animal that was kodshim, that was a korban, and it died on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, you can't move it because there's nothing that you can do to it. And even Reb Shimon would agree with that. Dekanami, you can also imply that, we can also infer from our Mishnah that actually this animal is talking about an animal of kodshim. Dekatani alei v'alachala shenitmes, because our Mishnah lists this animal that died right next to truma shenitmes, chala shenitmes. Machala de kadisha, just like chala is kadosh, because chala is basically a type of truma. So behema de kadisha, so we're also talking about an animal that is holy, an animal of kodshim, and that's why we're saying that if it dies, you're not allowed to move it, and even Reb Shimon would agree with that. At the time of the kadisha haduchulin sharia, okay, but now what's the inference? The inference is that the reason why you're not allowed to move this animal is because it was kadosh, because it was an animal of kodshim, implying that if it wasn't kodshim, you would be allowed to move it no matter what. This makes sense according to my brei de Rav Yosef in the name of Rava de Omar, who said that according to my brei de Rav Yosef in the name of Rava, that Reb Shimon would say that even by healthy animals that died on Shabbos, they're mutter too, right? They're mutter. So that makes sense, because our Mishnah is saying that we're specifically saying that an animal that was kodshim that dies, you're not allowed to move, but any other animal that dies, whether it was healthy, whether it wasn't, you would be allowed to move it. But according to my bar Meimar, the name of Rava, who says that according to Reb Shimon, if an animal was completely healthy before Shabbos and then it died on Shabbos, it would be asur. Well, then what do you do with our Mishnah? Because our Mishnah is implying that specifically an animal of kodshim you're not allowed to move. But any other animal you would be allowed to move. So you could say, no, our Mishnah is dafka talking about an animal that was misukenes. It was sick when Shabbos started. When Shabbos was coming in, it was already sick. And then you made it kodshim. And because you made it kodshim, that's why when it dies, you're not allowed to move it. But if it wasn't kodshim, then you would be allowed to move it, because since it was very sick and deathly ill, so you had intention that it would it could die, and that you would be feeding it to the dogs. So it could even make sense according to my bar Meimar in the name of Rava, who would say that if the animal was healthy when Shabbos started and then died on Shabbos, it would be muktzah. But our Mishnah is specifically talking about an animal of kodshim that was already deathly ill, and the reason why you're not allowed to move it is because it was kodshim. But if it wasn't kodshim, you would be allowed to move it because it was already deathly ill. And finally, we get to the last Mishnah of the daf. You can't join on an animal, but you can join on an animal before Yom Tif and then divide it up. Meaning, if it's Yom Tif and you wake up and say, you know what, I want to have a lamb for lunch today. So you go to the shaychet with a few friends and you say, hey, everybody, let's all get in on a lamb, right? And the shaychet will slaughter the lamb for you and divide it up and do everything, but obviously he's going to want to get paid. So says the Mishnah, so you shouldn't really, you shouldn't, you're not allowed to. The Gemara is going to explain maybe what you can do, but the Mishnah says, Pashtus is you're not allowed to, show up with your friends at the shaychet on Yom Tif and say, hey, can you slaughter us an animal and divide it up for us? Because there's the simple explanation, assumption is that there's some monetary implications there, because you're going to have to divide up the payment. But obviously, of course, what you could do is from before Yom Tif, you can all get together and go to the shochet and say, look, tomorrow can you slaughter for us an animal? And in advance, you already set everything up, who's going to get what and how much it's going to cost. And then on Yom Tif, Memela, the shochet can slaughter it and divide it up based on what they had agreed upon in advance. So what does it mean that on Yom Tif we don't join together to slaughter an animal? We don't want to start setting up monetary things on Yom Tif, right? So if you have a few friends that go to the shochet and says, look, can you slaughter for us a lamb? And they say, look, I want $20 of this and he wants $30 of that, and this costs this much and that costs that much. That we don't want to do on Yom Tif. Hechi Avid, what can you do? Rav says, Rav, maybe shtei behemus ma'amidan zo etzel zo. What can happen is that the slaughterer, the shochet, can bring two sheep that are like the same everything, same size, same weight, same everything. Put them right next to each other. V'omer zo kazo, and say, look, these are both essentially the same animal. Let's go, and then the next day, basically, you can pull out the animal that's still alive, and based on what happened the day before, you can kind of figure out, meaning after Yom Tov, you can kind of figure out who owes what. We also learn in the Beitzah like this: a fellow shouldn't say to his friend, look, I'm down to pay this amount or that amount for the meat. But what he can do is he can give non-monetary amounts. So for example, he can say, look, I'll take a quarter of the animal, or a third of the animal, or a half of the animal, and then like that, after the fact, they can go in and figure out how much that would cost. Friends, that was Daf Chof Zayin of Masechta Beitzah. The Daf started off, we were wrapping up our discussion about, can we say that there is or isn't muktzah for part of Shabbos or Yom Tiv? We tried to bring a proof from cooking beans on Yom Tiv, that it goes through a period where it's muktzah but then becomes non-muktzah again. We said, look, you can't bring proofs from that, because everybody, when Shabbos comes in, the chicken soup is boiling hot and is unedible at that point, but it's not considered muktzah. Then we got in once again to the question of nu. So can you inspect bechoris on Yom Tiv? We saw with Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya that he had a behor on Yom Tov. They wanted to get checked out. Nobody wanted to check it out for him. Rabbi Ami didn't want to check it out. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha didn't want to check it out. We had Rabbi Zrika who was saying, wait, but shouldn't the halacha be like Rabbi Yehuda, who says that we do check it out? They said that Rabbi Meir says like Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yosef then wanted to say that we pass like Rabbi Shimon because both Rabbi Meir, I don't know what just happened. Rabbi Yehuda says you don't check it out. You do check it out. Rabbi Meir says you don't. Now Rabbi Yosef wanted to say that we pass like Rabbi Shimon because also Rabbi Meir is like that. Rabbi says no. Okay. And then we saw basically what we saw at the end was essentially that Rabbi Ami and Rava would not check out moom on Yom Tov. They would check it out before Yom Tov and then ask follow-up questions on Yom Tov. Okay. Then we said that if you have a animal that dies on Yom Tov, you can't move it around. We wanted to say that maybe this would have to be Rabbi Yehuda, who says that nevela is muktzah, but Rabbi Shimon would say that you are allowed to move around nevela, as we said that you're allowed to feed it to dogs. But we could say that the Mishnah is even Rabbi Shimon because that we could say that it's talking about an animal that was kodshim. That's why it's muktzah when it dies. And finally, we got to a Mishnah that says that if you want to sort of divide up an animal to eat on Yom Tiv, to slaughter and to divide up with your friends on Yom Tiv, make sure that you don't get into monetary matters on Yom Tiv. You should work that out either before Yom Tiv or on Yom Tiv. Talk about things like a quarter, a half, and a third. Don't talk about how much money you're going to spend. Friends, that was Daf Chof Zayin of Masechta Beitzah. I hope you enjoyed it. Cheers.